Across Massachusetts was yet another formidable mind at work, and this is one that chose a different weapon entirely. She did not choose the private letter, she did not choose diplomatic observation, she actually chose the pen or the quill, and this particular quill was sharpened directly into satire. Now, this is Mercy Otis Warren. If Abigail Adams was shaping the revolution's inner circle, it was Mercy Otis Warren who was working on the public conscience. Mercy Otis Warren, she was born in 1728 into a very politically active Massachusetts family, and she was actually educated at home alongside her brothers. She spent a great deal of time absorbing classical literature, political philosophy, and history. Now, this was a real rarity for women of her time. Most women didn't get educated in these ways, but she had those brothers, and thank God she did, because what she lacked in formal authority, she replaced with something far more dangerous to the British establishment, and that was a public voice. She used that public voice and she used it relentlessly. She did not give a damn. As tensions in Britain were escalating, Warren actually began writing these political plays and pamphlets that blended drama with mockery and very, very sharp analysis. Now, her works were often published anonymously or under different pseudonyms, but their targets were unmistakable. Royal governors became these villains. She had corrupt officials that were becoming these over the top caricatures, and British authority was actually exposed not as noble governance, but as a farce. And satire was her genius. And this is at a time when rebellion actually could still feel really unthinkable, and satire in its own way kind of made it laughable, and then it seemed a little bit more possible. By turning these really powerful men into objects of ridicule, Warren helped strip the crown of its psychological authority. Once people laughed at power, they kind of stopped fearing it, in a sense, and to some degree. I'm not going to say that they were like, oh, that was funny and now I'm not afraid, but it was like, ha, she's made a good point, you know? Now, her plays, they circulated all over the place in pamphlet form. They were read in taverns, in homes, in meeting houses. They weren't necessarily meant for these grand theaters and these major productions. They were meant to be shared, repeated, argued over. They kind of invited these ordinary colonists into the political conversation, kind of got their wheels turning in a slightly more lighthearted way. Mercy Otis Warren wasn't telling people how to think, more so, she was teaching them how to think critically about the powers that be. Now, her influence expanded well beyond propaganda. And after independence, while many people were out there celebrating with a glass of champagne, Warren actually turned to history. Now, in 1805, she actually published a detailed book called The History of the Rise, Progress, and Termination of the American Revolution. Now, this was one of the first comprehensive histories of the war, and one of the only histories of the war that was written by someone who had lived at the center of its political world. It was a very interesting take, and this was not necessarily a neutral account of what happened. She wasn't just telling you the facts, she was deeply concerned that the ideals of the revolution were already eroding. She warned against political power, unchecked authority, and the rise of certain political elites could possibly resemble the very aristocracy that America had rejected. Now, her critiques were very bold, and sometimes so bold that it was a little bit uncomfortable, because she questioned everything, including the Constitution's balance of power, and she challenged the emerging political class. She warned that liberty could not be lost to kings, but to ambition. Now, some of the founders didn't particularly love this, and John Adams, who was once a very close friend of hers, felt very personally attacked. Now, their relationship actually ended up fracturing under the weight of all of her criticisms, but others really did seem to recognize the value of her perspective. Thomas Jefferson, he was one who actually admired her greatly. He praised her intellect, her moral clarity, and her dedication to these Republican principles. And I'm not saying Republican Republican as in the Republican Party. I'm saying Republican like the republic in which we stand. But the point that I'm making is that to Thomas Jefferson, Warren actually represented something that was crucial and essential to the American experiment. And this was a citizen who was both willing and bold enough to speak truth, even when it wasn't entirely popular. And that really might be her greatest legacy because Mercy Otis Warren didn't simply help to ignite the American Revolution, she helped to hold it accountable. And there weren't a ton of people who were bold enough to do such a thing. She really did understand that independence was not an ending, it was very much a beginning. And without vigilant critique, revolutions tend to decay into mythology. And through satire, she really dismantled imperial authority. Through history, she challenged American complacency. And in a nation still learning how to actually govern itself, Mercy Otis Warren reminded its leaders of a very uncomfortable truth. And that's that liberty does not survive through reverence, but through relentless examination. With that, the revolution's most dangerous voices actually stepped fully into view. And they're not on horseback or behind cannons. They're seated at their desks, rewriting the future one sentence at a time. Now, Abigail Adams and Mercy Otis Warren, they are only the beginning. Their names really survive, and we feel like we know them pretty well because they left all these letters, they left all of these books and correspondence behind. But beyond these two women, there were dozens of others whose influence was no less real, even if history did take it upon itself to tuck them into the footnotes. These are women who spoke through poetry, they helped to manage money and morale, and they turned culture itself into a battlefield.